right, and here we are back for another episode of the Providence Friarcast. It's December 2nd, 2024. Providence just back from the battle for Atlantis. I'm joined again by Brian Reddy up here to my left or right, depending who you're looking at, and Brendan Desrochers down below. Gentlemen, we had a bit of a rough trip to the Bahamas, although, it's the Bahamas, so I'm sure the folks that went managed to have a good time anyway. But not the best performance by the Friars. 0-3 with losses against Oklahoma in the opener. And what was their best performance? They played, they led for a lot of the game, kind of gave it away at the end, tried to come back and lost. Oklahoma ended up winning the tournament. So that's at least something to hang their hat on, I suppose. Although the performance against Davidson was, I think, it was either reading Kevin earlier or Brendan or somebody said just a no-show. And then followed up by getting sort of outclassed in the final game, in the third game in 3 days against Indiana, in a game that Indiana really needed because they didn't look good either in Atlantis, ironically. And there's a bit of a theme with the Big East right now, not looking good in these MTE events, with UConn losing 3 in Maui. Creighton did not play well in Vegas. But no solace to Friar fans who let their hatred be known. All of a sudden, the other edge of the sword has come out a bit of the PCBC and some of the other folks. But Brendan, we'll start with you. Kind of your impressions on Atlantis and the 0-3 start and kind of where the pieces can be picked up at this point.
Yeah, I think, the early season performances were generally not good. They got a little bit better. The Delaware State game was a bit better. The defense had been pretty good, and so we knew the team was struggling with injuries in the preseason and had a lot of new players, and so there was a sense that maybe things were coming together. They had about 8 days of practice for Atlantis after the last game against Delaware State. There was thought, we can get into it, that Bryce Hopkins was going to play. He didn't play, and the way it was handled seemed to be suboptimal. Let's put it that way. And then some of the downside of their performance in the early season came out in these games. We saw against Oklahoma, they turned the ball over a lot. They had 16 turnovers. Jaden Peer had 6 by himself, even though he scored the ball pretty well and had a chance to win the game at the end with a long three-pointer. Davidson was the really bad one because, okay, Oklahoma was a close game. They're a pretty good team. You almost won that game. But they didn't really play well, especially down the stretch, and they came out very flat. Indiana, they were playing on like 12 hours rest against a very talented team that really needed that win. The Davidson game was really to kind of paraphrase someone that I talked to, the kind of the question everything game. It's like, what is going on here? The defense was a no-show in that game. The offense was even worse. They had one of their worst 2-point percentage games ever, 27% against a team that's not in the top 150 in defense. And then even some of the decisions on who to play and who not to play, the fact that Justin Fernandez and Anton Bonk were the first players off the bench ahead of, even Ryan Meal had been playing so well, and I thought Eli Delorier might have provided a spark with his play off the bench. It was the kind of things like one, like I'll try to be quickly on this. There's 4 ways to look at this, and each one is progressively worse. The least worse part would be to say, hey, we don't have Bryce Hopkins back yet. He's probably going to come back soon, maybe as soon as tomorrow against Brigham Young. And really, this team just needs to have him come in and the other pieces fit around him. That's partially true, but I think mostly not sufficient. Second, we still have a lot of new players still coming together. We've had injuries. The team is kind of gelling and coalescing. And once they coalesce and you add in Bryce Hopkins, then things will kind of come together. I think that's partially true, but also not sufficient. The 3 and 4 are the more tricky ones because they're more pessimistic. 3 is the players are not good enough. The roster itself is not, at large quality, top 50 quality, which I think is partial, maybe true. Like we see Chris Asandako was seen as like a starting caliber Big East center by the staff, and he's not. Bensley Joseph, I think I've said for a while, I think he's underqualified for the role he's playing on this team. Wesley Cardette's been fine, but he is not like the primary shot creator that maybe people thought he should be. Jabri, we've seen he's been in and out. Rich Barron and Justin Hernandez have not really been very good at all this season. That's the third one. That's not fixable this season, and it also speaks to both development and talent recognition by the staff. And then the fourth one is just the overall coaching and game planning, implementing an offense and defense that works well for your personnel, and then going game to game and driving a consistent performance from the team. I think all of those four are partially right and partially not complete and insufficient. And I think this week has led me to be more concerned about 3 and 4 than I was maybe heading into the week, and thinking that just getting everyone to play together more and getting Bryce back will be enough for this team to make a run to the NCAA tournament. What do you think, Brian?
I agree with a lot of what you said, especially the first game. I was someone who thought Oklahoma was going to be a tough team to play. I've watched all of their games. Jeremiah Fierce is just, a star in the making. The one who surprised me, to be honest, was Kobe Elvis, because he took us out of the game, and he's good, but he's not that good. I noticed early in the game, Jaden Pierre had slipped and fell, or his leg went out, and it didn't seem like he was as aggressive on defense for the rest of the game, and Kobe took full advantage of that. As far as fears, I thought actually Corey Floyd, when he was on him, did a pretty good job and forced him into a number of traveling turnovers. But there's no way to sugarcoat the Davidson game. That was just not what we've come to expect the last 10 years, basically, from Friar basketball. The effort didn't seem as strong as ever. They just got taken apart on both sides of the ball. And it was really the first game that I saw this year that basically nobody played a strong defensive game. Wes Cadet was okay, but nobody had a strong game. It was Corey Floyd, he and Wes, to me, have been their best defenders. Struggled a lot more that game. And it could be, the second day in a row, whatever. Who knows? The Indiana game, I didn't have a lot of faith going into that, but, it is what it is. On the bright side, I did see a few positives. A lot of people have been, tearing the team apart. I thought a few players, it was the first time that Jabri has had a good game like that since the Stonehill game when he played against Indiana. I actually thought Oswin looked pretty good. His offensive skills just are developing. They're not there yet. But he did have, I think, 11 rebounds, 7 offensive rebounds against Davidson. And he played some really strong defense against a big physical Indiana team. He stopped them a few times. Unfortunately, they just killed us from 3. So I thought that was one of the few points. The other thing that you mentioned that really hit me was the substitution patterns. Justin Fernandez, as you mentioned, was the first one off the bench. He played 3 minutes, and we didn't see him again. Anton Bonk came in for 2 minutes. We didn't see him again. And then the next game, Ryan Mila was the first one off the bench. He had 2 quick stints in the first half, and we didn't see him again. So it just didn't seem consistent. And for a team, it could be part of the problem is that we have a lot of depth and a lot of somewhat similar type players, trying to figure out where they all fit. I do think Bryce solves some of these problems. We don't really have a true power 4. I think Wesley Cadet will do better moving off to the 3. Bryce can handle, physically, he's a different matchup than any other player on our team. So I think that will help a lot. And the other thing, and again, I hope it's not boring that I'm agreeing with so much what you said, is that to me, Bensley Joseph is more of that catalyst off the bench. He could fill in for either Corey or Jaden, pick up minutes here and there, but I don't think he's a true leader of the team with his offensive skills.
Yeah, and to pick up a little bit on that substitution pattern, that was something that stood out to me on even just listening to the game on Friday, the Indiana game. I was listening to the first half on the way down to a second day Thanksgiving with some other family, and I think it was Jabri had been heating up a little bit. He had made a few shots. Joe's starting to go, yeah, he's getting a rhythm now. He's starting to play a little bit, and then all of a sudden he comes out of the game. I think Joe even said at the time, like a couple of times, because then shortly after that, Indiana put an end to Providence's little scoring run and then kind of took control again. And he made a comment about it. And then watching the rest of the game when I got to the house, it just none of it made sense. And it kind of reminded me of some of those teams maybe like 7 or 8 years ago when I think it was like those teams that had like Drew Edwards and Kyron was a young guy and Bullock and some of those teams where it felt like in the beginning of the year, Cooley was just kind of throwing people out there, different combinations. Nobody really knew what their role was. And it was a little bit different in that, like, it wasn't necessarily there was 11 guys that might play, but it was kind of like nobody knew when they were coming off the bench, if it was going to be the sixth man, they were going to be in the ninth guy coming out. That no one had an idea or a role or a flow to where or when they were. And that was a little bit Cooley-esque, it turned out, as we kind of learned over many years. And Kim, I think, is, to me, it feels like he's just throwing things against the wall, particularly in a tournament like this where, there's also guys that are nicked up and they're dealing with injuries and things like that, where some of it you can kind of put on that, but it's not just something that's happened in Atlantis. It feels like they haven't figured out who is playing what spots and roles and who's going to be. Like Corey last year was a sixth man a lot, which is a role he sort of did pretty well. And now he's been starting a little bit. It's sort of just no one really, I don't think, has a feel. And that's just me from the outside looking at it. It doesn't seem like things are clear to anyone, including the players, about when they're going to be, when their number is going to be called. And obviously you want everyone to be ready all the time. But if somebody has a defined role and kind of can get a sense for where they might fit in on this team, it would help them probably figure out and be more cohesive and come together. And, we're starting to get to the point now, it's December. So some of the early talk in the beginning of the year about, well, we didn't practice a lot together and we had 7 guys for practice and we're using these games to figure it all out. Well, all right, you've played 8 games. You spent, almost a week down in the Atlantis all together, bonding and doing whatever else. God forbid the kids have fun. I know some people online were not happy about that, but God forbid people in the Bahamas go on a water slide or whatever. We're now at the point where a month into the season, things have to be a little clearer. And obviously Bryce Hopkins being a big question mark still in that he hasn't played. And there was a lot of talk coming into Atlantis. And we talked about it last week that it seemed like he was trending to play. And maybe, in talking to a lot of people, I think the best explanation I can come up with is that it's hard to know whether this is just the official story, but it does kind of make sense. It doesn't make a ton of sense to start his first game be on a floor that's in a ballroom in the Bahamas, that the temperature may be an issue and people are slipping. And so you could see that. I'm not sure I believe that was always the plan going in. I think that the plan was that he was going to play and something changed based on the media reporting that we saw. And I think Kevin Firehart wrote about this the other day, and I totally agree that the media reporting did him a big disservice. Also, I think the way that the coaches have communicated it publicly in some of the press conferences and other things, making it seem that he was much more close than maybe it was the reality and behind the scenes, although who really knows what's going on. So, and then of course you got the chuckleheads at ESPN on all the different broadcasts, just automatically just assuming it's a mental hurdle and he's got to figure. And maybe that's true, but it just felt unfair to Bryce that there's all these things that are being said about him. He's not really said anything about it since Biggie's media day time, when it was sort of in that beginning of the, in October. He hasn't really been talking to the media much. So I thought it was a little bit much that that he was being treated sort of as that it was like a decision he was making. And you saw a lot of the vitriol on social media from some of these like 23-year-old kids who, I right before we started this, Kevin just posted a new article sort of about the double-edged sword side of the online community. And he went through sort of the Cooley era, like the 2011, 12 early days. What was the fan reaction all throughout that time? And it's really definitely changed quite a bit. And the PCBC thing has sort of been only the last few years, even towards the end of the Cooley tenure. But a lot of those guys now aren't even in college anymore. And, I remember when I was in my early 20s posting on the Scout message board, and I didn't have nearly the level of perspective on life generally that I do now, to realize that, like, this is, and obviously the three of us here are doing this on a Monday night. Like, we're a little bit sick in the head regardless, but I think there's a certain level of understanding that you turn the camera off, you turn the microphone off, you turn the TV off, life goes on. It's not like you lose the game and all of a sudden your weekend's ruined and you're going to beat your wife. Like, you have to understand that, like, these are kids, and we're paying them now and everyone's a professional and all this nonsense, but they're kids and they're playing a game, and win, lose, or draw, Kim's life is going to go on. The players' lives are going to go on. So some of these people online need to figure out that their life needs to go on. And if it doesn't click, then maybe they need to just, like, go touch some grass outside. But that's a little bit of a rant. I just wanted to get off my chest on that. I was going to call that the People Don't Matter Hater of the Week. And it was going to be the PCBC people. Not all of them, because there are a lot. I've met several of them. A lot of them are nice people. But it just seems like there's a little too much nonsense going on of late. So I think that was worth calling out. Brian, I don't know if I think we lost Brendan. I'll see if he's back in there. Let me just check on him.
Well, from my perspective, and again, it's probably not great that we're agreeing so much, but one of the bad timing things of this is I watched a lot of the college basketball last week. I think I mentioned from November to March that I watched the news and college basketball. Pretty much that's it. And all of the ESPN tournaments, I think their staff was given the same notes. So each game you heard the same thing. So as you mentioned on Bryce, the same thing that the announcer said Wednesday was said again on Thursday and was said again on Friday, even though there were different announcements for Friday. So that narrative stuck out there that, Bryce, he's 100% ready. We all know that. It's just a matter of him getting over this hurdle. And quite frankly, we don't know that. I mean, him and his doctor and staff probably know, and that's about it. And it just kind of fed out there. And the other thing that I noticed, social media has gotten a lot more, I don't know if the word's vindictive or aggressive recently, the last year or two. And one of the things that's come up with a lot of these players is they're professionals now because they're getting money. And it doesn't make them less 21 years old and a college student. So, I found that bothered me. And, to be totally blunt about it, I don't think that the staff handled his whole situation well. I don't know who was putting out the word to, different media types that had it being written on last Sunday that he was playing. That's, his decision. Somebody mentioned it should have handled it like Celtics did with Vegas. He's playing when they announce him in the starting lineup. And they never said a word about it ahead of time until he showed up in the lineup. And I think that would have been a better path for the Friars to go. And there should be no discussion of his health until he's in the lineup.
Yeah, I think two things. One is Dave O'Brien did the first two games, and I'm a Red Sox fan. I've listened to Dave O'Brien a lot over the years, and even before he was the Red Sox main guy, he did a lot of college basketball for ESPN. Back when the Big East on ESPN before they reformed, and this is what Dave O'Brien always does. I'll try to mince words a little bit, but basically he'll show up at a game. He'll show up at like a Providence versus Stony Brook game, right? He'll talk to both SIDs, maybe one assistant coach, look at some stats, and whatever the narratives that he's being fed by the assistant coach or the SID is what he hammers the whole game. Doesn't matter what happens in the game, that's the narrative. Or the game, or he respond like, oh, we thought this going in, this narrative, but actually it's a little bit different. Because he's not like a college basketball junkie. He doesn't understand the sport. He doesn't spend a lot of time watching the sport compared to baseball. And he's like the worst possible announcer you could have for a tournament where you're having this kind of off-court semi-controversy and your team's playing like crap. It's just like the worst of both worlds, because he's not going to like Jimmy Dykes was pretty good, evaluating the game, and he had his few things he would talk about, Corey Floyd Jr., prize fighter, but he was, trying to evaluate the game, and he clearly had watched a bunch of their games already, and so that guy knows his stuff. But Dave O'Brien was like just kind of saying the same 4 or 5 things over and over again, which is his MO for college basketball for 20 years. The second one is, I think, you mentioned they're 21-year-old kids, and even if they're being paid, I totally agree. I just think, like, even if they're 36-year-old professionals, like, they're human beings. Like, why do we have to? It's one thing kind of in a very private setting. You're with a buddy, you're with your friend, you're with your spouse, cares about sports. You're like, oh, that guy, I can't stand that guy. I think he's a jerk. And you just like go on and on. But online, you just hide behind anonymity. But these people are reading things you're saying about them. Like, if you wouldn't be willing to say this thing to their face, and maybe some of these people would, but I doubt it, then don't put it on social media. Put it in like a more closed setting, a few people in like a small DM and that sort of thing. Like, sometimes you want to vent, and I get it. You just can't stand how someone's playing. You really are just very frustrated with something. But to use the social media to basically, air your laundry on these people. And a lot of it also is around betting too. We saw it last year with ticket gains, like where, people bet on games now, and you can bet on games very easily. And, a guy has a bad game, you laid 4.5 and the Friars lost, and ticket gains went 1 for 7 on threes, and now you're pissed off. So I think sports gambling, in social media, and then just people's willingness to just be ruder is just changed over the last few years. Sometimes it was nice to not know what was inside someone's head all the time.
Yeah, that's a good point. And, and again, just the idea that people question somebody's, strength or whatever because of their health, you never know what's going on inside their body. You don't know how they're reacting. And I just hate when people are judgmental. This might be too old for both of you guys, but I remember when I was younger, and the Houston Astros had a pitcher who was the best pitcher in baseball for a few years, J.R. Richard. And one year he just wasn't pitching well. He started off great and was struggling, and people were questioning his heart. And I think it was the owner or the general manager made a comment about, he was saving himself because he was going to be a free agent. And, he went out there and pitched and was terrible for like 4 or 5 starts. And then they put him on a disabled list, but they said there's nothing wrong with him, but we don't know what else to do. And a week later he had a stroke and never played again. But it was easy, he took all kinds of beatings all throughout the media for his health. And I just think that, that's totally unfair. You don't know somebody's pain level. You don't know what they're going through. And to just question that, and I thought that's what bothered me the most about the ESPN and a lot of the social media stuff. It was kind of saying that, he wasn't out there because he didn't want to, or he wasn't man enough for some of these things. And I think that's terrible. But hopefully when he comes back, people will appreciate the kind of player he is and the person he is. He's been a good representative of Providence College in his 2+ years here. So I look forward to seeing him whenever he's back on the court.
And the last part on this, a lot of this is Twitter, and I forget the exact numbers, but basically almost no one is actually on Twitter. Like, we think everyone's on Twitter because if we're on Twitter, you're going to assume a lot of people are on Twitter, but it's some single-digit percentage of people that are on Twitter. And of those people on Twitter, it's like some single-digit percentage of those people are the ones that are actually doing most of the tweeting or Xing or whatever. And so I'm hopeful that despite the team's rough performance in Atlantis and despite what we've seen on social media, that the event that it should be of Bryce Hopkins coming back, if there is against BYU or someone else, and the ovation that he should receive as someone who, 1, came here, 2, stuck it out when Coach Cooley left, and 3, stuck it out even through his injury, and has persevered, he gets the proper reception he should. Especially since kind of he's our hope right now. Like, if without Bryce Hopkins, like, there's not a lot that we can say that this team is going to bring a lot of joy to us in the next few months if he can't come in and really establish himself as one of the best players in the Big East. And that's a tall order and probably too much to ask for him certainly right away. But hopefully he'll be there by February, and hopefully the fans will support this team. Win or lose, like I don't know. Like I don't know these fans are expecting. Like, did they all just join the Sweet 16 year? Like, being a Providence College fan is more about dealing with adversity than it is about celebrating the wins. As much as I'd love to go to Final Fours every 5 years, that's not who we are. Maybe it's who we can be eventually, but let's go. Let's play well tomorrow against BYU and URI, and let's go from there.
The answer to your last question is yes, unfortunately. Some of them were juniors and seniors and students during that run, and it's sort of the old, you're a Yankees fan, and I think some of them are, or a more recent Red Sox fan in that run they had after, what was it, 100 years of nothing. Like there's some of these people who they don't understand the pain, and Brian understands it more than we do, even probably. But there's a certain amount as a Mets fan and a Jets fan and a Knicks fan and an Islanders fan and a Providence fan, I understand it probably better than I should have to as a human being. But there's always this mindset that, like, as a Providence fan, you're just waiting for the other shoe to drop. So something's going well, and somebody will tear their ACL, or somebody will get in a fight at the bar, which was more the case during my time at Providence College, where there'd be some off-court issue that would lead to something, or grades or whatever would happen, and you're just waiting for it to happen. And then things broke through the last 5 years of Ed Cooley, and that was coincided with a lot of the time that these kids, who probably didn't necessarily grow up as fans of Providence College, that's all they know. And so some of that is true. Okay, I think we've talked enough about that. I do think, by the way, I don't know, Bryce is going to play when he plays. And of course the rumor mill and the chatter has started again that, it's looking likely again. I mean, who knows? I'll believe it when I see him step foot on the court. Hopefully it's against BYU. Maybe it's at URI the next game. Maybe for some reason it's Mohegan Sun. It's it'll happen when it happens. So just hopefully enjoy it. Everyone's like reading tea leaves of like the video they put out today. He's sitting on the bench, like about to be announced, and that's like a sign that he's going to be, he'll play when he plays. But looking ahead now to BYU, which is the game tomorrow, and starts a stretch where Providence is not going to be favored. I think for their next 8 straight games, KenPom has them losing, which includes, by the way, URI and St. Bonaventure, which are both ranked higher in some of the analytics in the A10 than Davidson, who we just talked about the horrible performance against Davidson. So any hope to turn things around with Bryce Hopkins coming back would be great. But I think KenPom has it 72-68. Torvik, I think, is 73-68. They're all kind of in that range. Let me put something up here that we can talk over while we do some previewing. I'll go with KenPom first, so that I think that's the easiest to digest in a situation like this. But this is sort of the side-by-side of things. Hopefully people can see that, but you can see the colors. And I don't know, Brendan, if you want to start us off on the preview front.
Yeah, I mean, I think this game starts with Providence getting back to playing more solid defense. I was looking through the Atlantis games, and it was the first time that Providence had allowed 1.1 points per possession. The national average is around 1, a little over 1. It's actually 1.05 this year, but basically below average defense in 3 straight games since the last 3 pre-Kentucky games of the last Cooley year. So all of last year, Providence never did that 3 games in a row. It was the Xavier home loss, the Seton Hall senior day home loss, and the UConn quarterfinal loss in the Big East tournament was the last time that happened. And the last time that happened prior to that was actually like 2017. Like, it was a really long time ago. And that was a stretch where they played like Marquette and St. John's and a couple other teams like that. So it's been a long time, basically. We haven't played consistently bad defense to this level under Kim English until this point. So that's the first part. And BYU is a good offensive team. They are led by a guy that might be a lottery pick, Igor Dimin. He's a Russian freshman, incredible passer. He can shoot some. He shot 44% for the season this year on threes, 71% on twos. He has a pretty good block and steal numbers. Now, he did play much better in their earlier games against weaker competition. He was not as good in their loss in overtime in La Jolla, California, near San Diego to Mississippi. He was not as good, and he was okay against NC State in an 11-point win that they had. But he is a huge talent, 6'7", 6'9" point guard, great passing, and again, likely to be a lottery pick. I think he came into the season like likely first round, and now maybe he'll be a lottery pick. And then Fousseyni Traore, who is a senior, kind of undersized big, a really, really good rebounder, but also can block shots and finish 72% on two-pointers this year. 6'6", so he's shorter as the center than the point guard. Dimin is 6'9". The team really runs through those two guys. Kaden Catchings, another 6'9" player, is another one of their best players. He's scored at least 8 points in every game this season and had 17 against Mississippi. So I think their offense is going to be tough. They play a little bit faster pace, which I think will be good for Providence, because Providence will force teams to slow it down a bit on defense, at least they have this year until Atlantis. They shoot a lot of threes, so you hope maybe on the road those threes aren't falling. One thing is they're not a good free throw shooting team at 67%, although Traore is 91%. Dimin's only 58%. Catchings is 47%. And they have a couple other guys, 68 and 87, and Richie Saunders and Trevin Nell. So I think this is where it starts. Can they defend like they have all last season pretty much and through much of the early part of this season? Or if they can't, then they're going to have to score, and we'll see on that. The one other thing for BYU on both ends, they're a very good rebounding team so far this year. And so Providence's strength has really been rebounding, and especially since they haven't been a great shooting team, they're getting a lot of offensive rebounds. BYU is second nationally in defensive rebounding, led by Traore and also Dimin and Saunders, because they do have kind of like size across the board. Not a really tall center, but they're like 6'4", 6'5", 6'9", 6'9", 6'6" in their starting lineup.
Yeah, they put up a lot of points. They're averaging almost just under 90 points a game, which is something to be concerned about. They actually play. I've only seen them play, I think, maybe 2 or 3 half games or partial games, and they do have that 4 out 1 in strategy. They have 4 guys who are shooting 35% or more with at least 4 3 attempts per game, and then they kind of let Traore just stay in down low and bully people around. Like you said, he's a good free throw shooter. I think it's a good matchup. It's a winnable matchup for us. I'm not sure how we handle Dimin just because of his size at the point. I think that's going to be our biggest problem. That he'll be, I don't know who gets him.
Yeah, and I think one good thing is that he hasn't really drawn a lot of fouls this year. Only 3.2 per 40 minutes. So maybe you don't have to worry about putting someone on there that you're sort of about foul trouble as much. Now I say that, and maybe he draws 2 quick fouls on like Corey Floyd. But that's one good thing at least. They don't actually get to the foul line very much. So I think it's try to prevent them from getting open threes, close out the defensive glass, and hold them under their typical average. Like they're projected to get 72 points in 6 possessions. That's about 1.1 points per possession, which is basically what Providence has been giving up the last few games. Keep them to that or less, and BYU's defense has allowed 96 points in 81 possessions against Mississippi. Their defense has been relatively solid outside of that game. In that game, if you look at the box score there, they were really burned inside. Jalen Murray from Mississippi, you remember he was actually a former St. Peter's kid, but he had a big game, 7 of 10 on twos. Matthew Morrell, another name that's familiar, fifth-year guy, Mississippi, had a big game for them as well. Murray had 28 total. Morrell had 18. Dre Davis, friend from Seton Hall, had 18. Most of that was inside, and then he had 29 free throw makes. So it's not really the Providence strategy. We're not a big 2-point and free throw team. So we'll see how that works out. But at home, shots could fall. Again, I think it's mentality. Don't get down early. You know, I'm worried about the team's confidence right now. And I'll point back to last year, right? You know, they had a bad stretch of defensive games after Bryce Hopkins got hurt. 3 straight games, and they bounced back. And so I think, you know, we've seen Kim English and his staff be able to get these guys to bounce back. They had a 4-game losing streak starting with that Seton Hall game, and their defense was bad against Creighton, St. John's, and Xavier, all losses. The Xavier game, of course, they lost by 20 at home. It seemed like basically the season was over, but then they snapped right back and had 2 really good performances at DePaul and Seton Hall defensively, and then the Georgetown homecoming for Cooley. And with the exception of the Villanova game at Villanova and then the Marquette game on the road, they were pretty competitive most of the rest of the season and got basically within a whisper of the NCAA tournament. So all is not lost, but the opportunities to have meaningful wins are fading. Maybe this is a good transition too, unless you have more to say on BYU. Getting a win against BYU, I think, would be very important if we're still thinking about NCAA tournament resume, which I think we still need to be. It's only September 2nd. And now a game at Rhode Island is an opportunity. It's not just, just don't lose because that loss will kill you. It's no, Rhode Island's undefeated. It's probably a Q2 win if they can get it. And they have a chance to knock off a rival that they've been better than for years. They can knock them off from undefeated and get a Q2 win. So it's a huge week. Like if the season's going to turn around, it needs to turn around this week.
Yeah, and also even on both teams, BYU, I think they have certainly not performed as well against the better competition, and you can just look at the scores to see that. But even the underlying analytics sort of indicate that. So we'll see. I mean, Providence is not DePaul or Georgetown of last year. They're still very talented. They have a lot of big athletic players. It's going to be a real test for BYU to come on the road. It's a road game early in the season. So I think there's opportunity there at home. The URI game is interesting because they just beat Yale a little while ago to maintain their undefeated record heading into Saturday. I don't think they play again. I think this is their last game until Saturday, so they'll have a couple extra days to get ready for Big Brother to come to town. But I think looking at, and we haven't really touched on this yet, but today was the first day that the net rankings came out, which is sort of meaningless in the grand scheme of things. It's just like it's another thing that we can talk about, another data point to look at and point to and keep an eye on. But the critical thing, I think, in the long run is to sort of see how some of these things shake out in the end, because this is the quadrant system that will be on the team sheets. And so last year, URI was, I think, a Q4 home game, which is one of 11 Q4 home games that Providence played. Between, I think, 5 of the 11 were Georgetown, DePaul, and then URI, which is kind of wild to have that many Q4 games in your league and with an in-state rival. But this year, with a little bit of a revamped roster and Archie Miller seeming to find some things, right now they came in at 58th in the initial net rating, which right now, this is a Q1 game, most likely. I guess it'll probably, their 58 will be maybe even a little better tomorrow after they beat Yale. So, it's a road game under the top 75 in the net. It's going to be Q1 as of Saturday. We'll see if it stays Q1, probably more likely Q2. But still, that's a good opportunity for resume, because Q1 and Q2 sort of gets lumped together at the end of the season, because many leagues don't have as many Q1 opportunities as some other leagues. And it was, in years past, you could say as the Big East, except this year, the Q1 opportunities are maybe going to be a little fewer and far between, if things continue the way they're going, with Marquette the only team that's in the top 10 in the net, And the only teams that are surefire Q1 games are Marquette, UConn, St. John's, and Butler right now. So a lot of Q2, some Q3. Villanova, Creighton, Xavier home games would be Q3. Georgetown, Q3. Seton Hall would be a Q4 at home right now. So these games between this and then to look ahead a little further too, the neutral against St. Bonaventure, that right now is a Q2, but St. Bonaventure is 57th in the net. So URI and St. Bonaventure 57th in the net, 58th in the net, respectively. For some context, Davidson 114th in the net. That's a Q3 loss right now. So, yeah, I mean, just from that perspective, that's a little bit off topic of the game preview stuff, but that's, I think, good context to think about it when we think about these things as opportunities. It is truly like this is when you're building your resume. December, January, February, and then you want to be peaking in March, but you have to start building the resume. Most teams have sort of either run through their stretch of terrible games in November, or they are doing it now in December. And so Providence had their 5-0 start against mostly bad teams. They had a horrible performance in Atlantis. And now they have a chance to kind of get back to some kind of middle ground to be in a position where you can bring that curve down to the net from where they ended up today was, 104 in the net today. So not the worst net they've had in the last few years, by the way, to start on day one. So there's no reason why they can't turn it around and be down in the 30 to 50 range somewhere. 30 would be really, really good. But if they can be in the 40s and 50s, they're on the bubble. And that's unfortunately seems like their best bet right now is another bubbly sort of situation, which is not what Kim English likes to hear when he talks about the analytics, but they're going to matter and you have to win. So, getting BYU at home is a good opportunity because it seems like they're pretty good and they probably will stay a Q2 with a chance to be a Q1 home win if they have a really good year in the Big 12. And then URI on Saturday, obviously there's more on the line than just the records and the analytics because you never want to lose to them. But
especially when you live in Rhode Island.
Well, that's I Brendan and I don't have to deal with that, although he more connected than I am. It's just someone who was there for 4 years of college. But I think Brian, the URI roster, I think we were talking before, I think is maybe I'm surprised given the year they had last year, and then not even really knowing some of the names as they were coming in this off season. What's your thought on URI looking ahead to Saturday?
Well, Brendan was higher on URI in the offseason than I was. I thought that they would be, in that 9, 10, 11 range in the Atlantic 10. We'd see a little bit of improvement from last year, but I wasn't sold on them. But they're looking a lot better. And one guy in particular is Sebastian Thomas, who grew up in Providence, went to Bishop Hendricken, played his first 2 years at URI. And to be honest, he didn't look like, a major conference type player. He then went to Albany, kind of changed his game around, let everything out. He led the America East Conference in scoring last year. And now he's back, and he's a lot closer to the player he was at Albany than he was at URI 2 years ago. He's a very good passer. He struggles with his shot, but he's not afraid to take the shot, and he'll hit a few. But he's a very good passer, takes good control of the ball, and makes the tough passes to the guys who are hot. David Green is playing tremendously this year so far for them. I've seen, 3 or 4 times I've seen him play. Yeah, my opinion, he's their best player. People may remember Jaden House from last year. I think he had 5 threes against us or something. He really went off and kept URI in the game for the first 28 minutes or so. He's been struggling the last few games. I think tonight was, unless he got a basket late, would have been like the 4th straight game he's been in single digits. He started off good, but I think part of that is because Thomas and Green have stepped up more than he's struggled. It's just that the opportunities aren't there, and they're going to the guys that are getting things done. And those two, especially to me, fit in well. They've got Javante Brown is a big, I think he's 7 feet, 250. He clogs up the space. He knows what he can and what he can't do. He doesn't try to do too much. He'll get in the way defensively, and he's there for putbacks. Or when Thomas is driving, a lot of times he'll feed it into him for the quick basket. So it's a much better roster than I expected, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you look at their roster and what they do well, their offense, one, they've been shooting three ball incredibly well. I don't know exactly how to dig into Yale tonight. I know David Green hit like 5 or something, maybe more, but they were 40%, which is 14th in the nation. They don't take that many, but they make the ones they take. And on 2-pointers, they're top 25. And the other thing is they're 5th in the nation in free throw rate, and that's led by Sebastian Thomas, who has 47 free throw attempts this year entering the Yale game. So he's a guy that, even though he's not a great shooter, he can score inside despite being just 6'1" and 175, and he gets to the line a ton, along with being a really good passer. So he's kind of like more of like in the Vincent Council mode, like not a great shooter, but can get in the lane and make plays for others and also score. I think he's actually better at getting to the line than Vincent Council was, if I remember, and maybe a little slighter too. But that's what they're dealing with there. I think that might be a committee thing, because I don't think you just want to put Corey Floyd on him, because you might want to put Corey Floyd on a guy like Green or maybe House from time to time as well to try to stop the threes. I think Joseph's going to take him some, and maybe Pierre too, because otherwise their other guards are Cam Estevez and Jamarcus Lawrence, are a little bit taller, but probably players also Pierre could guard. On the other side, I think their defense is kind of similar to where Providence was a couple weeks ago, maybe a little bit. I mean, they're only 118th right now, and Providence was, I think, 40th or 35th, but a little bit overrated. They're getting a little bit of 3-point luck. They're 12th nationally in 3-point percentage allowed, which is not really befitting how like that tends to regress towards the mean for most teams. It's more about your ability to prevent people from taking them. And they're 44th in 2-point rate. And as we saw for Providence, they dropped a ton of spots in 2-point percentage defense over a 3-game span. And typically, if you're not getting a lot of blocks and they're only 191st nationally in blocks, it probably is a sign that maybe your 2-point defense isn't quite as good as it seems. They don't, besides Javonte Brown, who's their 7-foot center, they don't have another good shot blocker. And so I do think their defense is vulnerable. They're another team that will play fast, but the other good thing is they don't force turnovers. So I think this is actually, when you just look at those sorts of numbers, a slightly better matchup for Providence. They can keep them off the free throw line, not turn the ball over, which they shouldn't based on your guys' defense, and they should be able to score. On the road, it's going to be hard. It's their first true road game of the season. And you know, a lot of these guys haven't played a road game at Providence. But the crazy thing is, they start Big East play in the 10th. They play DePaul on the 10th at DePaul, and that's going to be a hard game. But for people who are starting to give up on the season, I point us back to 2019, 2020. I know it was a different coach, and I know the Big East is a bit different, but by this time then, Providence had lost to a bad Northwestern team, alma mater, by 9. Penn, which wasn't good at home. Long Beach State, which was 297th in the Ken Pom, out in the Wooden Legacy. And then Charleston, which was 170th by 8. They barely beat Pepperdine by 3. And then they came back and lost at Rhode Island by 14. And a couple of weeks later, lost to Florida at Barclays, a game where I was in attendance, by 32. At that point, they were 6-6. And they looked completely lost. And yet that team was a shoo-in for the NCAA tournament by the time COVID hit in March. So, yes, that was Ed Cooley, and he had experience turning teams around. But, and yes, looking back, of course, we're like, oh, yeah, Alpha Diallo, David Duke, Lon Pipkins, like that team was great. But that's not what we thought on December 2nd, 2019. So hopefully that is a seed of hope, even though I've been maybe the most pessimistic one here on the podcast, that things can get better, players improve. This means a lot more to them and to Coach Ingles than it does to us. And you can be sure that they're committed to improving and getting better, and hopefully see that tomorrow. Let's move to our final segment, which was pretty well acclaimed last time. We talked about Dwayne Williams. It's a segment called Remember Some Guys, with some kind of faint names from Providence's past. This is not necessarily going to be a segment for Ernie DiGregorio and Billy Donovan and Eric Murdoch or Ryan Gomes. Today we're going to talk about a player who played at Providence for 3 seasons out of Jersey City, New Jersey. His name is Bilal Dixon. He's a center, and he was a 6'9" player. He finished at Towson. I guess did he crossed over with you a bit, Mike, at Providence? What do you remember about Bilal Dixon?
Not a ton, to be honest. Personally, didn't have any classes with him that I recall. I'm not the best arbiter of that, though, for many reasons. But I think we might have had a couple of years. I don't think it was all 4 of my years. But yeah, he I recall him coming in as sort of somebody that was a little bit of a bigger guy and slimmed down quite a bit over his time at Providence. And I think generally speaking, the attitude around campus was that he wasn't Jeff McDermott in terms of his friendliness, maybe we should say. I don't know what the best way to say it is, but in talking years later to somebody who was around the program at the time that he was there, this person who has been around a lot of teams over the years in different places referred to him as the worst teammate he's ever seen. I don't know what, who knows if that's true or it was hype. We were playing golf and there was some beverages involved, so it's hard to know how hyperbolic maybe that claim was. But, he was a very, I think he averaged like something like 6 and 6 in his career, including finishing up at Towson in the end. I do have a clip here from a vaunted play. I'm sure everyone here will remember this. It was the number 2 play. Can't believe it didn't make number 1. I don't know what made number 1 on February 13th, 2010 for the ESPN Top 10. But I'll play this clip and we can all revel in it.
All right, top plays. We're counting them
in a shootout.
Providence, Villanova, Vincent Council finding Bilal Dixon, who dunks it, and he is fouled. A lot of good dunks and then good defense as well. In the top plays, that pretty impressive.
Not a surprise, probably, that that game Providence gave up 92 points and lost under Keno Davis. He was, I think, a 2-year Keno guy and a 1-year Cooley guy.
Yeah.
And that was his freshman year, actually. And so that was a stretch where Providence allowed at least 79 points in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 of 13 games. And that was in the midst of an 11-game losing streak to end the season. And surprisingly, not to end Keno Davis's career at Providence. He still had one more year in 2010, 2011.
What I remember about Bilal is I took my daughter to it was his first game because he was a redshirt freshman, and they played Bryant, and I had to look up the numbers to verify it. But he was 8 of 8 from the field, had 7 offensive rebounds, 11 rebounds total, 3 blocks, 2 steals, 16 points. And I thought we had a guy. I said, now I know why they redshirted him. You look at him, how much better he is. And it was amazing how inconsistent he was. He would have some great games back to back, and then he'd have like 5 games in a row where you didn't even notice he was there. He actually finished up that year. Providence played Seton Hall the last game of the season, and he had 10 offensive rebounds that game, 19 total and 11 points against Seton Hall. A week later, they played again in that infamous 109-106 game where PC scored like 60-some-odd points in the second half, and he had 16 and 12 that game too. And he looked like he had promise, and that was probably the peak of his Providence career. And then he went to Towson and pretty much the same player for his 4th year. His numbers were like 6 and 6 roughly for 4 years.
His most minutes he ever played
was his freshman year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
His minutes went down each year at Providence. Even his last year at Towson, when he was a starter again, he still had fewer minutes, at least as a proportion of his total team minutes, than he did it as a freshman at Providence. If you have some guys you want us to remember, you should hit us up on Twitter or various other platforms. Join our Discord. We'd like to remember some guys with you. So if you have some, we've had a couple guys in the mid to late 2000s so far. Maybe there's someone from the 70s, 80s, 90s, or 2010s you want us to remember. But we'd be happy to add Bilal Dixon. His high school Queen of Peace High School in New Jersey no longer exists as of 2017. So
he's actually shown up to the dunk then and now the amp. And he's been there like 3 or 4 times since then, where they've announced him to the crowd.
That's an interesting one. That's an interesting one. So we remember Bilal Dixon.
Yes, we do, with varying forms of dunks and rebounds and other things. All right, so we're trying to keep these a little shorter. We went a little crazy last week on the first one, having fun, but this was another good one. We added the Facebook page, which I don't think Instagram worked, although I tried that. So next week we'll also be live on YouTube if we can. I think we're going to try to maybe do this Monday nights. Just sort of might work out for our schedules and also the team schedules, because I think we'll have some weekend stuff to talk about and preview some games for the upcoming rest of the week and the weekend. So thanks for tuning in. I see there's several of you on X and Twitter, and I've been getting some texts from people in the Discord as we've been going. We had a very famous person join the Discord during the show, and I'm excited to welcome him there and get him chatting a little bit. So we'll see everybody next week. And Providence tomorrow night. BYU is on Fox Sports 1 at 8:30 Eastern. I think it's Dave Sims and Dickie Simpkins, if I'm not mistaken. And Saturday is on ESPN 2. Is that right?
I thought it was on CBS Sports.
Is it CBS? Oh, CBS Sports Network. You're right. CBS Sports Network. And the tip time had been TBD. I think it was
noon.
A noon tip on CBS.
Praying
Sports
for Steve Lapis. Anyone else want some Steve Lapis on their Saturday afternoons?
He used to love coming to Rhode Island. He'd stay at Cooley's house. So maybe I don't know if Kim would have the same level of hospitality, but that would be nice.
Not that far from the Kingston, also Cooley's old house.
That's true. Kim is in a different situation, I think. So, all right, that'll do it. We kept under an hour. Everybody have a good rest of the week, and we'll talk to you next week.